Hey, what is up guys? This is Nishi from MST.TV here, back with another Market Watch episode. So it feels like it's been a little while since we've done one of these. We had some stuff going on last week, and there were the Duelist Nexus reveals as well. But we're back and we have a bunch of interesting things to cover off. There's a couple of cards that I want to look at following the NAWCQ from a week and a half ago, but we also got some pretty interesting reveals from Age of Overlord, which is the core set coming after Duelist Nexus, and that's looking like a really amazing set that is going to be changing things up. We will have another Market Watch that's going up on Friday, since today we definitely aren't going to have time to cover absolutely everything in just the one episode. Let's get started. First up, let's take a look at Pearly. So this card is obviously one of the main monsters for the Pearly deck. On summon, it lets you reveal the top 3 cards of your deck and add a Pearly card that you reveal to your hand, and it also has a quick effect that lets you turn it into one of the Pearly Xyz monsters. So for a while, everyone thought that Pearly was going to be one of the best decks here in the TCG. It dominated in the OCG, and we were just expecting hits to Kashtira to come on the ban list. However, the ban list unexpectedly hit Pearly really early, limiting Pearly Delicious Memory to 1, which limits the deck's ability to access Plump and slows the deck down quite a bit. Because of that, we saw Pearly go from a peak of $50 to falling under the $20 mark for a while after the ban list dropped, as people just thought that the deck wouldn't be able to keep up with the rest of the format. However, as we saw at the NAWCQ, Pearly is still alive and able to do well at premier events, and it even took a couple of top spots in the top 32 as well. On top of that, Pearly has a couple of new cards coming in Duelist Nexus that will actually help the deck out a lot, including an Xyz that bounces your opponent's cards and a trap version of Kashtira Theosis. All of that said, we've seen the price of Pearly rebound pretty quickly, as they are now back up to around the $35 to $40 mark. Amazing Defenders is still relatively new, so we shouldn't expect to see the cards reprinted for quite some time. These cards aren't going to tank in price randomly either, because those reprints are so far off. We'll have to just wait until the next couple of big North American events to see just how well Pearly is able to perform with the new support cards, but I think that the general consensus is that the deck will still do well, and we're expecting the cards to remain relatively pricey. Up next, we have Peaceful Planet Calarium. So Calarium feels like the new version of Pearlarino or Raitsoth, which were the Tearlament and Kashtira field spells. This card lets you search for a Manadium monster or a Visa Starfrost on activation, and if a tuner that you control is destroyed, you get to special summon one of those destroyed tuners back to your side of the field. Obviously, this is a really key card for the Manadium strategy, and while Manadium were really slow when Cyberstorm Access first dropped, they've kind of grown and evolved over time to where they're now an actually pretty decent strategy. I believe that they had 2 top 64 spots at the NAWCQ as well. So I remember when Cyberstorm Access first settled down, right? Calarium was a relatively cheap card compared to what we were expecting. I think it came out at around 30, sort of bottomed out between $20 and $25, which is kind of surprising given all the hype around the deck. Now, however, the deck has started to see some momentum, and I think that generally players are believing that the deck is good enough to compete, but not yet good enough to get hit on the ban list. So after the next ban list, I think there's a very good chance that Manadium will actually be a top tier strategy. Because of this, there's a lot of players jumping onto the Manadium train, which has caused it to shoot up in price over the last couple of weeks or so to now being a $40 card, basically double what it was before. Cyberstorm Access isn't due to be reprinted in the Megatins, so you might actually have to wait quite a while to get access to a cheap version of this card. It definitely depends on what you plan on playing next format. I don't really see this card dipping too much more in price. Maybe if you can snag a set for around $90 to $100, that's a pretty decent price to pay if you're going to be playing the deck for the next couple of formats. On to the next card, it is Triple Tactics Thrust. So Thrust, I think, is a card that everyone knows about. It is one of the absolute best cards in the game right now. If your opponent activated a monster effect this turn, you can set a normal spell or trap card from your deck to your side of the field, but it can't be activated this turn. However, if your opponent controls a monster, you can add it to your hand instead. Now this card is absolutely insane because of how easy it is to be able to meet the card's activation condition, especially in a format where Kashtira is still running around with a Rise Heart, and it can search for some amazingly powerful targets, including evenly matched Raigeki, Harpy's Feather Duster, and Daruma Karma Cannon. I think that there were a couple of players around the community saying that this is like the strongest card in the game right now. I don't know if I would take it that far, but it's definitely up there in terms of card strength. Now, at one point, Thrust was really expensive, and I think that just a couple of weeks ago, actually, it was up around the $85 to $90 price point per copy. However, we just got revealed that Thrust will be getting an Ulti printing in OTS Tournament Pack 22, an unexpectedly early reprint and rarity bump. On one hand, it's cool because theoretically this increases the number of thrusts that are available on the market, which should bring the price down. As people want to upgrade their copies to ultimate rares, they now have extra secret rares that they can list, and that increase in supply should lower the overall price. However, it's an Ulti OTS pack printing, right? So it's a harder to find upgrade and isn't exactly improving the card's accessibility all that much. That being said, the card has fallen down to around $65 to $70 right now, which is around where it was a few weeks ago. Given that this card isn't slated to be in the megatins, it might actually be quite some time before this card does see an accessible reprint, so I could see it going back up in price depending on how the format goes. I do think that if you can grab these cards for around $55 to $60 right now, it's maybe not a bad pickup because the card is really strong, and I'm expecting that at worst this card's price will remain steady over the next couple of formats. Moving on here, we're looking at Artorias, King of the Noble Knights. This card is a rank 4 monster that requires 2 Noble Knight monsters to make, so not exactly generic. Now on summon, you can equip 3 Noble Arms cards from your graveyard to this card. They have to have different names, and then you can detach a material to pop back row on the field, equal to the number of Noble Arms equipped spells that you control. So on one hand, Artorias used to be an okay card. I think that in really early versions of Noble Knights, you didn't really go into this card all that often, but you ran a copy in your extra deck just in case you needed it. Now, however, with all of the new Noble Knight support we have, this card is even worse than before. In fact, of all the lists that I've seen, I don't think I've seen any choose to run Artorias in the extra deck at all. It kind of baffles me as to why this card would go up in price. Noble Knights did get new support in Duelist Nexus, and the support looks really good, but for the most part they don't play that many Noble Arms cards, and they're more of a Link and Synchro based strategy. They don't really play any Xyz monsters. The only thing that I guess doesn't surprise me is that the Yu-Gi-Oh community decided to make yet another bad buyout attempt, targeting this card just for its name and availability, without really thinking anything about the card's application or usefulness within the deck. However, that's a good thing for us that are paying attention to the market and identifying opportunities to sell cards that are being hyped up. The Ultimate Rare version of this card is a ridiculous $60 right now, while either the Ultra or Platinum Rare version is anywhere from $5 to $10. The listings are sort of all over the place. These are the only few printings of the card, so the card was probably fairly easy to buy out, especially given the age of the cards. But if you have any of these sitting around in your bulk, this is absolutely something that you should be looking to dump as soon as possible so that you can capture as much value as possible, even if you have to sell at a lower percentage than usual. Okay, so this one's probably going to be a bit of a surprise to a lot of you, but Reborn Tangu is yet another old card that is unexpectedly increasing in demand. This card is pretty simple. When it leaves the field, you special summon another Reborn Tangu from out of your deck. Because this effect is mandatory, it can't miss timing, which means that if you conduct a Synchro Summon using Reborn Tangu as a material, you still get to special summon out another Tangu from your deck, so that's another body that you could use as either a Synchro or Link material. Reborn Tangu used to be really big in the Synchro era. Tangu even has a format partially named after it called Tangu Plant, where you could really abuse Tangu's replacement effect and make some crazy Synchro plays. Now, however, despite Links being so popular, Reborn Tangu is a hard card to use because you have to normal summon it out, and it's difficult to interact with the card to get it off the field. Now, however, with the release of Revolution Synchron, you can normal summon Tangu and Synchro with it right away with a Revolution Synchron in hand, and Tangu will still replace itself. I don't know exactly what deck it is that's going to be using this, but it seems like an interesting strategy in theory. With that said, and the fact that it's a really useful card in Time Wizard formats, Reborn Tangu has gone up in price for its holo versions. Actually, this card has surprisingly few printings, with the only holo versions being the versions that came out in this card's initial release. It was a sneak peek ultra rare, which is now going for around $12 to $14, and it was also a super rare in the set, which is now about $5 to $7, so either version is going to cost you a fair bit. The card does also have a common printing that is only a quarter or so that is an option for you budget players, but this is definitely still a card to keep an eye on because it's potentially useful now, but also in older formats. However, it's also a pretty prime candidate to be reprinted in the relatively near future if it does start to see play. On to the next one. TG Trident Launcher is a cool Link 3 monster that I think a lot of players kind of just forgot about. Just last week, it was revealed that we're getting some cool new TG support cards in Age of Overlord, and the cards are actually really awesome. There's a couple of synchros and spells and a new main deck monster. All of it sounds really cool, and you can make some pretty scary end boards with it. TG Trident Launcher is actually from Savage Strike. Not exactly an old set, but I think it was some random TG support that we just got, but was never really able to put TG back on the map. And Trident Launcher is an okay card. It requires a TG tuner as a material, but it's a Link 3, and on summon you can summon 3 different TG monsters out. One from each your hand, deck, and graveyard, but then you are locked into TG monsters for the rest of the turn, and your opponent can't target TG monsters that you control that this card points to with card effects. So all in all, I think it's an okay monster for the late game, and you probably want to have one in your extra deck just in case, but I don't think you really want to go into this card all that often. Locking you into TG monsters kind of sucks, especially when you could be making plays with something like Crimson Dragon, and if you were to consolidate all of your resources into this card and it got impermed, well, you're probably going to lose the game. Anyways, this card is still technically played by them, and so TG Trident Launcher with its 1 secret rare printing is now a $5 card, nothing too crazy. I think it was up as high as $8 to $10 a few days ago, but it has cooled down since then. If you are really interested in TG, keep a single copy of this card just in case, because you probably want to have access to it if you're playing the deck, and you probably got it for when it was only $1 or $2, but definitely try offloading the rest of them while there is some hype around the card before people realize that it just isn't all that great of an option. Alright, there's one last card I want to talk about for today, and it's definitely one of the more forgettable cards in Yu-Gi-Oh's history. It is Bonfire Colossus. So I remember when Cosmo Blazer first came out, I think this was like the worst secret rare that you could possibly pull. It was just such a horribly useless card. So this card is a free level 8 body that you can special summon from your hand if you control a fire monster, not too bad so far, but its mandatory on summon effect requires you to target 2 fire monsters you control and destroy them. So back then, we had a very early raw version of Fire Kings, but they weren't really that strong and couldn't get that many monsters onto the board that easily. Now, however, because of the way that the game has evolved, we have another Fire King structure deck coming, and it looks pretty good, so now people are freaking out because you could theoretically use Bonfire Colossus to destroy your own Fire King monsters and proc their effects really easily. However, out of all the deck lists that I've seen so far, I haven't seen any that actually run Bonfire Colossus, and while it theoretically might be useful, I don't see a world where this card is actually going to see play, even in a more casual build, since its effect is just too situational and potentially costly. However, Bonfire Colossus only had 1 printing from back in Cosmo Blazer as a secret rare, so naturally a ton of people flocked to it to try to buy it out. The card is now a $7 to $8 card. I think that when this card first saw a little bit of hype when the Fire King stuff was first announced, it was anywhere from $10 to $15, but obviously it has since then cooled back down. If you guys happen to have these lying around in your book and you can dig them out, now is probably the best time to dig them up and offload them, since even when the Fire King structure deck does come out here in the TCG, I doubt that anybody's going to be seriously looking for this card. Okay guys, that is all we have for today's episode. Some really random ones today, especially since we're in the middle of like product reveals and a set coming out all at the same time. So it's like there's a little bit of everything happening all at once. But if you guys did enjoy today's Market Watch, please make sure that you let me know by hitting that thumbs up button. Also, make sure you leave a comment in the comments section down below if you guys want to see a certain card talked about in this Friday's Market Watch episode or future Market Watch episodes after that. Also, if you guys haven't already, do make sure you hit that subscribe button as well to get the latest and greatest content from both Tombox and myself. And until next time, guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.